Good evening, everybody. Very pleased to welcome you this evening to this talk. This talk I'm going to do about St. Valentine's Day or Valentine's Day, which everybody celebrates without really knowing where it comes from, what it's about, why on earth it's on the 14th of February. So what I'd like to share with you this evening is the origins of this and give you some interesting information about the calendar, how the calendar works, and how certain relationships inside the dates of the calendar are linked to numbers and number systems, which is a very a new way of looking at things. At the end of this talk, there are maybe a few people who will join me to join in, ask questions, say what they think about it. I can see that there's Xavier, who's I think in Spain, who's connected. And there are other people, I think, in England. And so at the end of the talk, maybe we'll be able to have a bit of a chat. And talk about what's in this talk. So let's get started and let's go into the question of Valentine's Day, the calendar, and the golden ratio. So I'm going to have to just organize my screen here a little. So this is going to work. Okay. On this photo, on this image, you'll see the zodiac, images of the Denderah Temple in Egypt. I'm going to show you how all this is linked together. I just need here to put this banner on. So there we go. So the first slide I'm going to show you is linked to Geoffrey Chaucer, one of the oldest writers in Great Britain, a poet from the 14th century. And the knowledge we have about Saint Valentine or Valentine's Day comes from him, from a poem he wrote in the early 1380s, which was called the Parliament of Fowls or the Parliament of Birds, and which talks about a group of birds which gather together in a parliament which is presided over by nature, and they gather together on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, to choose their mate in a gentle spring atmosphere. Now, this is what nature says to the birds. Birds, listen carefully to me. I understand your urgency, and I will progress as swiftly as I can. It's their urgency to mate. You are well aware how on St. Valentine's Day, by my command, you all come here to choose your mates through the delightful urge that I have instilled in you. And then you quickly depart again. But we must not depart from tradition. So what is this tradition? He talks about tradition. Tradition means to transmit. It comes from a Latin word, tradere, Latin word, which means to transmit, to communicate information. And he says we must not depart from tradition. So the question is, why is it on February the 14th? St. Valentine's Day. We'll come back to why it may be called Valentine's Day, because there are a lot of different stories of the origin, nothing clear about who Saint Valentine may have been. I'll give a totally new suggestion on this a bit later. But the first question is, why February the 14th? What's special about that particular day? Now, if we look at the calendar here, this is the zodiac, which was the ancient calendar before the Julian calendar came in. And this is Aries. This was the start of the year on the 21st of March at spring equinox. And the months, there were 12 months of the year, which are shown by the signs of the zodiac. So they were like months, all right? So you can see the signs as months. So Aries is the first month. And then the year was split into 4 parts: the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the autumn equinox, and the winter solstice. So these are linked to astronomical events. At the summer solstice, the sunrise will be furthest to the north if you live in the northern hemisphere. And at winter solstice, the furthest to the south. And at spring equinox and autumn equinox, then the sun will rise in between those 2 extreme positions in what we call east, which is halfway between the extreme positions of sunrise between summer and winter solstice. So the year is naturally split into 4 parts, which we call seasons. And the year used to start then at Aries, 21st of March, and then summer season would start with Cancer on the 21st of June after the summer solstice, when the days were longest. And then autumn starts with Libra, and winter starts with Capricorn. So if we look at the months, since Julius Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, the year starts on the 1st of January. Before that, the year used to start for the Romans I'm talking about Europe here. The year used to start in Europe, in the old world, at spring equinox. Okay. And then Julius Caesar positioned his calendar in 46 BC and positioned the beginning of the year on the 1st of January. Now, during the Roman Empire, that calendar was kept the major calendar. And then at the end of the Roman Empire, at the fall of the Roman Empire, when sort of general organization disappeared, people were going back to older calendars. Different older calendars were reintroduced. And it wasn't until the 16th century that a French king said, we're going to make the 1st of January again the major day for the beginning of the year. And then the Pope Gregory, when he introduced his calendar in 1582, insisted on a more general basis all over Europe about the year beginning on the 1st of January. But the first mention of it was by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. And so the 1st of January falls in the sign of Virgo. Okay. No, not Virgo. What am I talking about? Verseau. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with my French. Aquarius. Okay, so we put Aquarius, the major month for Aquarius is in January. Okay. And then February for Pisces, March for Aries. So here we find a planetary relationship. Mars is the planet linked to Aries. And so the word March comes from Mars, which is linked to Aries. Then the next month is April, Taurus. The origin of April is not clear. If you go on Wikipedia, they won't give you an origin for April, the name April. I'm quite convinced it comes from the bull, Apis, which was the bull in Egypt. And of course, it's the sign of the bull. It was the sacred bull. The Romans, with the Mithra religion, had the bull as a very important animal And so April would come from that, as far as I'm concerned, Apis, the bull. And then we have May, which comes from the Maya constellation of the Pleiades, the star Maya. And then June. For the Romans, June was called Lunicius, or the moon. It was linked to the moon. And then July, which is the 5th month. If you start, it's the 5th sign of the zodiac. And it was called Quintilis for the Romans because it was the 5th month after the spring equinox. And then August, which used to be called Sextilis. And then September, sept means 7. And so here we see it was Quintilis, and then August was Sextilis, and September is the 7th month. We still call it September, although it's the 9th month of the year, and that will continue with October. Oct means 8. It used to be the 8th month of the year, but it's today the 10th month because we start in January. But in astrology, it's the house 7, the house 8, sorry, so October, and then November, which is the 9th month, and December, which is the 12th month. So we see how the names of the month are still linked to the ancient calendar that started in March. And there'd be a lot to say about the fact that the months are linked to the signs of the zodiac, because there's a lot of confusion today about the difference between tropical zodiac and sidereal or stellar zodiac. And the names of the months obviously haven't changed, whereas the constellations have moved. And it's very interesting to see how people can't really take in these two systems. Anyway, that's not our thing tonight. That's just to show how the year was divided according to the 4 major points, solstices and equinox, and then 12 months. Now, it's possible to divide the seasons in 2. So if we divide a line, draw a line which divides into summer and winter, then the middle of summer is August the 6th, which in the Catholic calendar is called the Transfiguration. It's a fixed date in the Catholic calendar, which means it won't change from one year to the next. It's not linked to Sundays, and it's not linked to the moon or anything like Easter. It's a fixed date in the calendar, August the 6th. And opposite that, we have February the 4th, which is the solar Chinese solar New Year. So a couple of days ago, it was the Chinese Moon New Year. So all the major Chinese ceremonies are linked to the Moon New Year, but the Chinese actually have 2 New Years. And their solar New Year is determined as the exact mid-position of Aquarius. So it's exactly halfway between spring equinox and winter solstice, or winter solstice and spring equinox. That is the Chinese solar New Year on the 4th of February. And these can be called cross-quarter days in English or in England. We have another one here, November the 5th, which is called Guy Fawkes Night, and is said to celebrate a man who wanted to blow up Parliament. I'm quite convinced it's a much older feast day, that those bonfires come from a much older time, and that they were kind of reused. I actually have taken part in a popular festival in France where they burn what is called, they burn the Man of Winter. And so they take a dummy and burn it on the fire like we do with Guy Fawkes. So it could quite clearly be that Guy Fawkes Night is a kind of, modern version of an older feast day, which is situated halfway between autumn equinox and winter solstice. And then May the 6th, there's no particular feast day I know of linked to that particular date. But people often confuse these cross-quarter days, which are exactly halfway between the season changes, with the ancient Celtic calendar, where the dates were on the 1st of May, the 1st of November, the 1st of August, and the 1st of February. And that's something different. It's not linked to the same thing. So if we look at the days, the number of days between winter solstice and spring equinox, the winter season has 89 days. This is because the Earth's orbit is not perfectly circular, so things are separated into unequal parts. So winter is a shorter season, and so the 4th of February splits it into two parts, 44 and 45 days. The spring is 92 days, so May the 6th has 46 days on either side. Summer is 93 or 94 days, according to the time that the beginning of the season starts. So it's the longest season, sometimes 94 days. And then the winter season is either 89 or 90 days. So summer is 94, 93 or 94, and autumn can be 89 or 90. This is depending on whether autumn equinox falls on the 22nd of September or the 23rd. So I was talking about the Celtic calendar, the ancient Celtic calendar, which is often confused with the cross-quarter days. And that was separated by two axes, Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain. These feast days are always 40 days after the season starters. So Imbolc is 40 days after winter solstice, which leaves 49 days to spring equinox. Beltane, the 1st of May, is 40 days after spring equinox, leaving 52 days to summer solstice. Lughnasadh, which was the feast day of the king, is 40 days after summer solstice and 50 days before autumn equinox. So there's a big difference there. And then Samhain or Samhain, which was the beginning of the year, the feast of the Druids, was on the 1st of November and separates winter 40 days and 50 days. So that Celtic calendar is different to the cross-quarter days, and they're very often confused. The 40-day period is very important. It's the division of 360 by 9. So it's the creation of months of nine months of 40 days, which is a totally different type of calendar. It's linked to transformation, which is why we have quarantine and different periods of 40 days, which are linked to major transformations like the Great Flood or Jesus in the desert. These are times of transformation. So if we look at the winter period, the winter season, first of all, as I said, it has 89 days, which go between the 21st of December and the 21st of March. And these are divided into months, as we've seen. 1st of January is the 11th day of winter, etc. The Chinese Solar New Year, the February the 4th, is exactly in the middle, as we saw, 45 days and 44 days. Okay. If we come back to the zodiac, then we see how the Chinese Solar New Year is exactly in the middle of Aquarius, with Capricorn and Pisces on either side. Now, our topic this evening is St. Valentine's Day on the 14th of February. So how does St. Valentine's Day cut up the winter season? So between winter solstice and St. Valentine's Day, is 55 days. And from St. Valentine's Day to spring equinox is 34 days, which makes 89 days altogether. Now, if we look at the ratio, we saw that the quarter days, like the Chinese New Year, cuts the year in two. So you have exactly the same number of days on either side. Whereas here, the division is not in two. It's a relationship of 55 to 34. And this gives a result of 1.6176. Now, I don't know if you recognize this number, but this is going to be the subject we're going to go into now, is why St. Valentine's Day cuts the winter according to this ratio. So if we look at what's called static symmetry, which everybody calls symmetry, basically, it's when two things are exactly the same. So on either side of something, the two things are identical. So, for example, if we look at this picture of Ramses, which comes from Karnak in Egypt, this is a picture coming from Christopher Dunn, who has photographed this statue and who has shown that the face is perfectly symmetrical. And it's perfectly symmetrical in 3D. So if you take the profile is perfectly symmetrical. And from the front, it's perfectly symmetrical as well. So the shape of the cheeks, for example, the shape of the cheeks is exactly symmetrical in 3D on either side of the nose. The nose is symmetrical. If you take the right side of the photo and the left side and you interchange them, you don't see the difference, which of course is not the case for a human face. If you take a human face, you cut it in half and change the sides, you don't get the same face. People don't look the same. We don't have perfectly symmetrical faces, differences. Whereas here, this statue is perfectly symmetrical and has led Christopher Dunn to wonder how it was done. Because if it had been sculpted by hand, it's very unlikely that the sculptor could have done perfect symmetrical work in 3D like that. We have another case which a lot of people don't know about, but which in the few months to come, I think will become major knowledge with a new film which is coming out called Barabar. And these Barabar caves are in India. They are carved out of solid granite. So on the right of this photo, you can see a doorway. And if you go outside, you're on a hill in India. And around you, you have a massive sort of granite rock formation. And the builders have dug into this rock formation and have created a perfectly symmetrical chamber inside. Not only one chamber, there are 7 chambers, 5 of them are perfectly finished. They have a mirror finish to them, so they're polished out of granite. But what is astounding is in this film that is going to be coming out, we'll be seeing that they've done scanning, 3D scanning of these caves. And what comes out of it is that they are perfectly symmetrical. So the left side and the right side have exactly the same lengths, curves, exactly opposite each other. So that's something which is very interesting. It's perfect symmetry, but it's called static symmetry because the two sides are exactly the same. Then there's no movement. They're exactly the same. So if they were on scales, then those scales will be perfectly balanced. So there'd be no movement. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, an American called J. Hambidge introduced a notion called dynamic symmetry, which he thinks existed in Greece, although the Greeks never really used the term dynamic symmetry. But I'm quite sure that they knew dynamic symmetry, and they used the techniques of dynamic symmetry, and that they got it from Egypt. And J. Hambidge, when he defined the sort of rules of dynamic symmetry, he wrote a very, very interesting book on this subject, and quite a number of notable American and Canadian artists in the early 20th century adopted this principle of dynamic symmetry to create their art forms. And he shows this Greek vase or vase, which has the dynamic symmetry composition. Now, Vitruvius, who was the Greek who wrote about architecture, he talks about symmetry, and he says that symmetry results from proportion, which is very interesting. He says in Greek language, proportion is termed analogy, and proportion is the commensuration of the various constituent parts with the whole. So it's how the individual parts or the smaller parts relate to the whole thing. And he says that in works of art, every part was so regulated as to bear a just proportion to the whole. So he talks about symmetry not as being something identical, but as being something which links different parts to the whole thing. Okay, so if you cut something in half, then those two parts with relation to the whole have the same relationship. It's half and half. But in dynamic symmetry, there's another relationship which was expressed by Euclid in 300 BC. He called it, he says, a straight line is said to have been cut in extreme and mean ratio when as the whole line is to the greater segment, so is the greater to the lesser. So it's called extreme and mean ratio. What does this mean? So if the line we take here, the red line, earlier it was cut in two, but here it's going to be separated in such a way that, well, A plus B is equal to C. So we have a shorter part, a longer part, and then the whole thing. And so the whole thing is A plus B. And extreme and mean ratio is C over B. In other words, the ratio between the whole thing and the larger part, C over B, is the same as the relationship, the ratio between the larger part and the smaller part. So that's the principle of dynamic symmetry. Okay, it's not cut in half, so it's not a 1-1 relationship. It's a smaller to a larger relationship in the same way that the larger part relates to the whole. Now, there is only one answer to this question, and it's called the divine proportion, or the golden ratio, phi. So we see that phi is the larger part and 1 is the smaller part, so that the whole thing is phi plus 1 over phi. So phi, which is B, divided by C, phi divided by 1, is equal to phi plus 1, which is the whole thing, divided by the larger part, phi. Okay, so this equation results from this definition of the division. And if we express that differently, phi over 1 is phi, and so this gives us phi squared equals phi plus 1. And that's a very particular thing, is that this is something which the square of it is equal to the number plus 1. And the answer to that is that phi is equal, well, that's an approximation of phi to about, I don't know, 15, 30 decimal places, or it's an approximation. This is not a whole number, And when you square it, you get exactly those same numbers with 2 in front, 1.6180339, or 2.618033988, etc. It's exactly one more. So this number comes from that definition. It's often rounded down to 1.618034, 339, 988, okay, so 034, or rounded down to 1.618, which is the most common way to round it down. So this golden ratio is not a whole number, but it's a number which is called irrational. Irrational because it can't be reasoned. You can never find exactly what it's worth. It's like the number pi. It can go on to an infinite amount of decimals and it never stops. Okay, so we always approximate it, but we can never actually give it a name, an exact name, which is how that was the definition of God in some ancient traditions, where God was something you couldn't give a name to. You couldn't actually give it define it precisely. So it's indefinable. It can be approximated by what's called the Fibonacci series of whole numbers. So by using whole numbers, we can get closer and closer to this sort of impossible to catch number. Okay, so let's just look at these number series. So the most simple number series, which even if you say I'm hopeless at mathematics, you shouldn't have any trouble understanding this series, which is the simple number series where you add 1 to the preceding number. So 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 1. This seems so simple to us that it seems ridiculous to actually talk about it. But it is a series, and it gives this series here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So everybody learns that really early on in school, and the problems in mathematics often come after. Everybody grasps at least that. Now, the Fibonacci series, this is the whole number series. The Fibonacci series is another whole number series, which is linked to the same principle. It starts in the same way. Okay, so the first 3 equations are the same. 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and 1 plus 2 equals 3. But the way of defining them is not the same, because each one is adding on to the preceding number. So 0 plus 1 equals 1. To get the next one, we're going to take the last 2 numbers, so 1 and 1, and add them together. That's 2. Then the last 2 numbers and add them together. 2 plus 1, 1 plus 2, that's 3. But for the next number, we're not going to get 4 like we did in the whole number series, because we have 2 plus 3 is 5. So here we see this series has jumped the number 4. And if we take the next one, 3 plus 5 equals 8, 5 plus 8 equals 13, we see that this series starts getting bigger, faster and faster. 8 plus 13, 29, 13 plus 21, 34, 21 plus 34, 55, 35, 34 plus 55, 89. These are the first numbers in what's called the Fibonacci series, and we can see how it gets bigger rather fast. So what's special about this series? What's special about this whole number series is that when a number in the Fibonacci series is divided by the number that precedes it, the result gets closer and closer to phi, or the golden ratio, and that becomes more and more precise as the series progresses. So 2 over 1 equals 2, 3 over 2, 1.5, and you can see here that we're on either side of 1.618. Then 5 over 3, 1.666, 8 over 5, 1.6, which is slightly closer to 1.618 than 1.666. And then 13 over 8, 1.625. then 21 over 30, 1.615, 13 over 34 over 21, etc. Okay, so we're getting closer and closer. The further up we go in the series, the closer we get to a ratio, which gives us the golden ratio. Now, if we look at these two numbers, 55 and 34, which are numbers which emerge from the Fibonacci series, and we give 1.61765, those are the number of days that are on either side of St. Valentine's Day. St. Valentine's Day is 55 days after winter solstice and 34 days before the spring equinox. And added together, those two numbers make 89, which is the next number in the Fibonacci series, and which is the length of winter, 89 days, or if you don't have a leap year. Just a little less known fact about the golden ratio. Most people know about the golden ratio. I'm going into the details just in case, and I'm perhaps explaining it slightly differently to what you may have heard up to now. But if we, instead of taking the number that just precedes the number, so if it's, instead of taking the number which is just before, if we take the number that precedes it by 2 places, then we get closer and closer to phi squared. So 3 over 1 is 3, 5 over 2, 2.5, etc. And you can see here that we get closer and closer to 2.618 here by dividing the number which is 2, dividing by a number which is 2 places in front, 13 over 5, 21 over 8, 55 over 21, etc. Okay, and the same thing again, if you proceed by 3 places, then you get close to phi cubed, which is 4.236067, okay, and, or the square root of 5 plus 2, but so this number, you jump 3 places, so 5 divided by 1 is 5, 8 divided by 2 is 4, and you're getting closer and closer to phi cubed, okay? So the golden ratio, the number phi, has these very particular numerical characteristics, and there will be a lot to say about it. It's not my subject tonight. Everybody has heard, I suppose, about the fact that the golden ratio is present in nature, the way that leaves, phyllotaxis, the way that leaves come up around the stem, and all kinds of things in nature. But that's not my subject. Today we're talking about the calendar. So if we come back to February the 14th and Valentine's Day, we see how, as we've seen, so Valentine's Day cuts winter according to the Fibonacci series, so according to the golden ratio. Okay, so it's a harmonic relationship. Harmonious, maybe. But what we can see as well is that if autumn equinox is on the 23rd of September, autumn lasts 89 days, and 89 is the number in the Fibonacci series. So if you go from autumn equinox to Valentine's Day on the February the 14th, you are separating a period of 144 days into 2 periods of 89 days and 55 days. So the winter solstice is positioned according to the golden ratio between autumn equinox and St. Valentine's Day. So we see how St. Valentine's Day is a very important date in the calendar, in fact. And this used to be known, and today people celebrate it all over the world. Huh? It's celebrated in Japan and all over the world. People celebrate Valentine's Day. And nobody really knows why they do it on that particular day. Okay, so it's a very interesting point. So winter solstice, you can see, is in a golden ratio relationship between autumn equinox and St. Valentine's Day. You can all check up easily on these numbers. Just count the number of days. Okay. Excuse me. Now, what I'm going to show now is how the golden ratio was used in Ptolemaic Temple design. It's the period of Egypt, the most recent period of ancient Egypt, of old Egypt, which was when the pharaohs were Greek. And I'm going to present you here some very, very important groundbreaking work done by Gyula Priskin. Here he is. I don't know him personally, but every chance I get to promote his paper, he has written a paper which you can find on academia called The Golden Ratio in Ptolemaic Temple Design. And in this video this evening, I'm going to present now what he has to say about this. Okay, so in his introduction, he says the dedicatory inscriptions describing the progression of building work through time on the twin temples at Edfu and Denderah, 237 to 20 BC, and he quotes some people, provide us with a solid set of data clearly indicating the use of the golden ratio in the temple's temporal layout. He's talking about inscriptions, things that are engraved on the walls, dates that are engraved on the walls in the temples of Edfu and Denderah. These dates have been quite clearly established by different people who've studied them, Egyptologists. And so there is no question about the dates being the correct dates. And the number of days between those different dates can be calculated. Once you know exactly the dates in question and you know about the Egyptian calendar, you can see how many days there were between the different dates. And Gyula Priskin had the good idea to do that, count the number of days. And what he discovered is quite astounding, because we're going to discover that the dates of construction engraved in the temple at Denderah and Edfu give us the golden ratio in the precision between different phases of the buildings to an incredible precision in the golden ratio. So what I'm going to be saying in the next few minutes is just, I'm presenting Gyula Priskin's work on this, and many thanks to him. So the Egyptian calendar used to be divided into 3 seasons: Aket, inundation or flood; Peret, growth; and Shemu, harvest. Okay, so inundation was when the Nile flooded the whole of the valley, and then when the waters cleared, then things could be sown, the grains could be sown, and then afterwards it would be harvest time. Okay, excuse me 1 second. There's a sort of message. Okay, apparently my image was hiding part of the photo. Okay, so these are the 3 seasons. Each season was 120 days. And the dates inscribed in the temples are given as follows. So this is how the inscriptions were made. Firstly, they give the reign year of the current ruler. So if it's the 30th year of the rule of Ptolemy IV, then it will be written for Ptolemy IV, all right? So The current ruler is given first of all, and it's followed by the epagamenal day if necessary. Now, in the dates I'm going to be giving, there are no epagamenal days, so it's a kind of complication which we don't need really to go into. But it's just that the Egyptian calendar was 365 days. The Julian calendar introduced the leap years, but before that, in the Egyptian calendar, there was no leap year. There were 365 days. And so the Egyptian civic calendar slowly diverged according to seasons, okay? And I'll look into this in a second, because the Egyptians quite clearly knew that they could add leap years. And according to a historian called, his name escapes me, Mircea Eliade, the pharaohs actually swore oaths not to inscribe leap years, to keep the 365-year calendar. Okay. So there were 360, there were 30 months of 12 days, 360 days, plus 5 extra days called the epagamenal days, where the gods were born. And they were kind of outside of the calendar, and they brought the calendar from 360 days, 12 months of 30 days, up to 365 days. And those 5 days were following each other. So there were 5 feast days in the middle of the year. Okay, so once they've said who the ruler is and what year of his rule we're in, then they give the month from 1 to 4, because each season is divided into 4 months. Then they give the name of the season. So it will be, say, the 3rd month of spring, 3, and then, well, it's not spring, is it? But Peret, for example, the season of growth. And then the day of the month from 1 to 30. So the example of one inscription is the year 10 of the reign of Ptolemy III. It's 3 Shemu, so it's the 3rd month of the harvest season, Shemu, and it's the 7th day of that month. Okay, so these dates are quite clearly inscribed on the temple. Now, I want to quote you here something I got from ChatGPT a few days ago about this Egyptian calendar. So he says the Egyptian calendar was far from perfect, as it shortened the year by a quarter of a day, a fact the Egyptians were well aware of. So ChatGPT has an idea of what a perfect calendar should be. Okay. He doesn't actually say what his idea of a perfect calendar is. He seems to think everybody should know that. But he says it was far from perfect, as it shortened the year by a quarter of a day. So we can assume that for him, the perfect calendar is a calendar which exactly gives the length of the year, the solar year. Okay. He says the Egyptians were well aware of this fact. However, despite its inconvenience, because it was rather inconvenient, because the dates changed according to the seasons, okay, it was preserved under the pressure of tradition for several millennia. So it's kind of suggesting that there was some kind of stupid sort of pressure which kept people from advancing and kept them in some kind of, idiotic old phase, which is totally ridiculous when you see what the Egyptians were capable of. And when you know that it took them extra effort to maintain their ancient calendar, then we may think that there's a good reason for that. And I'm going to explain to you what I think the reason for that was. It's important to note that the Mayan calendar also included the 365-day year. They didn't include leap years, and they followed a 365-day calendar, which also slowly moved away from the seasons. Okay, so that's what ChatGPT thinks. Okay, so whoever's programming him doesn't really know anything about this subject. Now, let's look at these temples. We're going to talk this evening about two temples, the Temple of Denderah and the Temple of Edfu. Here's where they are. This is the north of Egypt. Here's the Delta, the Nile Delta. This is the Mediterranean Sea. And here is the Nile, the green band running down here. This is the Fayoum Oasis here. And the Nile runs more or less north-south. And then all of a sudden, it's going to go off on a sort of lump here. And we're going to find a lot of buildings here. But for this evening, we're going to talk about Denderah and Edfu. Now, these buildings were built, these temples were built, Edfu from 237 BC and Denderah from about 54, 56 BC. But they were built on the place of older temples. It's a well-established fact that these are more modern, more recent temples which had been built to replace older temples. So the place itself had existed for a much longer period. And I think Edfu can be traced back almost to the Old Kingdom. Okay. And Luxor and Karnak, Luxor-Karnak is here between the two temples. So we can zoom in on that and see a bit closer this relationship. Here's the Temple of Edfu. Let's see a few pictures. This is the main entrance to the Temple of Edfu with its engravings. And this is inside. This is called the Pronaios. So we've just come in through this door. This is the kind of courtyard area, which is in front of the temple. It's called Pronaios. Naos means temple, and Pronaos means in front of the temple. And here's the temple itself, or the Naos. And then you go inside and things get darker and darker. Okay. And this is an artist's impression of what Edfu Temple looked like at the time. This is Denderah Temple with an archway here, which is maintained. This is orientated more or less north. I won't be talking about the orientations of the temples tonight, but I'll be coming back on that on one point, most probably. This is a small temple which is on the roof of Denderah Temple. There's a very, very strong roof on the temple where there was a zodiac. Okay. And Edfu is dedicated to Hathor. You can see her here in the pictures here. This is her head, Hathor, who's on the, it's her temple. Edfu is Horus. It's the temple of Horus. Denderah has some incredible sculptures and engravings. This one you can see painted, these beautifully detailed engravings on the ceiling inside and here under this archway. This is a plan of the temple. You can see the hall of pillars here at the entrance. And so some people could come into the Pronaios and Naos, and then other people into this hypostyle room, which is the entrance. And then you finally get into the Naos, the central Naos here, which would be called the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest could enter this particular point. Okay, and here you can see a very long staircase going right up the side, which goes up to the roof. And there'd be a lot to be said about that staircase. But anyway, that's not our subject. So here is the detail of the inscriptions on the temples of Edfu and Denderah. So this is the Edfu temple, and this is the Denderah temple. Okay. So these dates given here are dates of the Julian calendar. Now, the Julian calendar wasn't actually operational at that time. Julius Caesar introduced it in 46 BC, so at that time there was no Julian calendar. The dates are given here in the Egyptian civil calendar, like we said, 3 Shemu 7. So it's the 7th day of the 3rd month of Shemu in the 10th year of Ptolemy III. So that was the first foundation of the Naos of Edfu, and that can be dated to 237 BC, and it's given us the 23rd of August in the Julian calendar. If we were to express it in our present day calendar, the Gregorian calendar, I think it would be 2 days earlier, because the calendar drifts approximately, it drifts 3 days every 400 years between the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar. So this could probably be the 21st of August in our present day calendar. But there you go. And on the right of that, you have a day here, which is the Julian day, which is the number of days starting at a certain date, 4700 BC somewhere. And so the days are counted from that date, the earliest possible beginning of civilization. And then every day is counted. So if you want to know the number of days between two dates, if you have the Julian day, then you take the difference between those two numbers and you see the number of days. That's how it's used in Excel, for example, on computers. They calculate the number of Julian days. They don't start in 4000 BC, they start in 1900, but it's exactly the same principle, okay? So, yeah. So let's look at the different phases of the construction of the temple. Here on the right, the first foundation of the naos here, of Edfu, the second foundation of the naos, the installation of the gates. So that's the construction of the temple, and then its consecration. And then the pronaos, so the forecourt in front of it, was started, and then it was finished. And then there was the death of a king. This is kind of strange inscription. The death of a king and the construction of minor elements. Could be strange to put a date concerning the construction of minor elements. But anyway, it's put in there. We'll come back to this in a minute. And then the consecration of the pronaos, and then the end of the decoration, installation of the gates of the pronaos, which puts an end to the whole of the construction of the Edfu temple. Then Denderah started, you see here, the 16th of July, 54 BC. And that was the foundation of the naos, and then the temple was put into service. So the temple of Denderah started after the end of the construction of Edfu, 57 BC, 54 BC. And maybe you can't see the dates there. I'll put this side. So here you have the construction of the naos was finished on 20 BC, the 7th of July. So that's more or less the 7th of July, because this is the beginning of the Julian calendar. 54 BC is the 16th of July. It corresponds to the same date in our calendar, okay? So that's the general idea of this table. And you can see I've counted here the number of days. Well, when I say I've counted, a lot of this stuff comes directly from Gayula Prisca, and these figures come directly from Gayula Prisca's paper. I have added in this talk certain things which he doesn't mention. I don't know if he knew them or he didn't know them, but I've added them into the talk. I'll point that out. So here are the number of days, 41,286 days between the beginning of the construction of the temple and when the pronaos was finished, okay? Which is a very important point. And then we have the number of days from then to the beginning, to the foundation of the naos in Denderah, okay? 25,516 days, right? So we're putting into relationship here the dates that are inscribed in Edfu and in Denderah. Now, maybe you could say, well, these are two different temples. Why should you compare the dates of different temples? But in fact, these two temples were linked, perfectly linked. Ceremonies linked them. We'll be talking about that earlier. It's Hathor and Horus. So these two temples were linked. Just want to point out two dates here. You can see that the first two dates took place on the same day of the year in the Egyptian calendar, the 7th day of Shamu, the third month of Shamu, okay, the harvest season, the 7th day of the third month of the harvest season, here and here. And these correspond, I believe they may correspond to the 15th of August and the 21st of August. I'll be looking into that because they're very important dates. Okay, but there's exactly 25 years of 365 days between those two dates. We'll come back on that. And again, here we have the 18th day of the 4th month of Shamu, 18th day of the 4th month of Shamu. So you have the same date here. So exactly here, 18 years between the consecration of the first, the Naos, and the Pronaos was finished. 18 years exactly. Okay. Now, if we look closer at these dates, these numbers, let's first of all see the total time between the beginning of Edfu and the beginning of Denderah. If we add them together, we get 66,802 days, which is 183 years and 7 days. Okay, so almost an exact number of years plus a week. Okay, but what's interesting is if we divide that whole period by the period of construction of the temple and the Pronaos of Edfu, we get 1.61803, which is the golden ratio precise to 5 decimal places. 1.61803 is the golden ratio precise to 3 decimal places. Okay, now that is given by these whole numbers, and these whole numbers comes directly from the inscriptions on the temple. So consequently, if we take the length of the construction of the temple and forecourt of Edfu with the time up until the beginning of Denderah, we divide those two dates, we get again 1.61804. So this is the principle of the golden ratio, the ratio of the smaller part to the wholer part, so 225,516 days to 41,286 days. So the ratio of the smaller part to the larger part is exactly the same as the relationship of the larger part to the whole. Okay, so it's a perfect example of the golden ratio. Now, if we take the whole thing and divide it by the smaller, then we get 2.618. As I explained, if we take a gap of, if we take the whole and relate it to the smaller part, then we get the golden ratio squared, 2.61804. Okay, so let's look at some more time differences in this table. So first of all, how long did it take between the first foundation of Naos and the second foundation of Naos? It took 9,125 days. Now, if we divide that by the year, as we saw, 365 days, that's exactly 25 years. And we saw that a couple of seconds ago. It's the same date, all right? 25 years, an exact number of days. I'll be coming back to this. And then if we take the construction of the Pronaos, the length of time for the construction of the between the moment it started and the moment it finished, we have 5,909 days. All right. Now, if we take that number of days and divide it by 365, we get 16.189 years. Now, Gyula Priskin doesn't mention this. This is something I discovered when checking up on these days. Maybe he knew about it. Maybe he didn't want to talk about it, because here we have a number of years expressing 10 times the golden ratio. Okay, so it's not just a number coming out from a whole number of days. It's a number, 16.18 years for the construction of the the pronaos in Edfu. All right. Now, if you take that same number, 5,909, and you divide it by 29.53059, what's this number? 29.53059 is the exact length, average length, between two full moons. Okay. The distance between the time between two full moons isn't always exactly identical because of orbits and stuff. But if you take an average over 100 full moons, then you get this answer. Okay, 29.53059 days is the average length of a full moon. And if you take 5,909 days here and divide it by that, the answer is 200.098. So this period also corresponds to what you would call 200 moons. There are 200 full moons between the beginning of this construction of the forecourt and the end of the construction. Okay. And it's linked to the golden ratio. It's 16.18 years. Okay. So that is really very interesting because we see how the year period and the moon period are linked together with the golden ratio, which starts to make the golden ratio looking like a number which actually organizes the heavens, not just vegetables or not vegetables, plant life. All right. Now, next to this date, 5,909, which gives us the end of the pronaos, there's a message inscribed. And this inscription states that the length of time needed for the construction of the pronaos at Edfu was 16 years, 2 months, and 10 days. Okay. So how long is that? So 16 months, 16 years of 365 days is 5,840 days. 2 months is 60 days and 10 days, 10 days. So if we add that together, that gives us 5,910. So although the date gives us 5,909 days, the inscription indicates that it took 5,910 days. So they've added an extra day on. They're giving two different indications here. Why would they do that? And Gyula Priskin realized that if you take 5,910 and you divide it by the Julian year, in other words, the year with leap years, not 365, but 365.25, you get 16.1806 years. Okay. Now, the idea of leap years was well known to the Egyptians. Even ChatGPT-4 knows that. But in 2038 BC, the Greeks actually tried to impose the leap year system on the Egyptians, and it didn't work. They refused it, and it didn't work. And the Egyptian calendar was maintained with its 365 days. So there was a struggle about this, and the length of the solar year was known. And so this little inscription here is very, very intriguing, showing that they're showing the golden ratio linked to the solar year. Okay. So this 1 day difference here is very important. All right. I'd like to point out something important now is that 5,840 days is 10 Venus sidereal or synodic cycles. So I'll be explaining this. A Venus synodic cycle is 584 days. Okay. So to come back to Chaucer a minute, when he wrote his poem about St. Valentine's Day and the birds meeting on St. Valentine's Day, he dedicated his poem to Venus, and he made an invocation to Venus, who he says, Venus, O sweet, blissful lady, who frightens anyone she chooses with her flaming firebrand, and who sent me this dream. Be my help in this endeavor, since you are the most able to. So he's putting St. Valentine's Day under the protection of Venus. And he says, I saw you in the sky. He's talking to Venus. I saw you in the sky in the north-northwest as I prepared to write this account. So give me the wit to describe my dream accurately and make the rhymes good. Now, this is very strange because you can never see Venus in the north-northwest. Venus is on the zodiac band, so it's always close to where the sun rises. The sun in England will not rise in the north-northwest unless you go to the north of Scotland. So if he were in the north of Scotland, he could have seen the sun rising above northwest, but otherwise not. So it's rather strange for him, and that would have been at summer solstice. Okay, so had he seen Venus in the north-northwest, he would have had to have been around summer solstice in the north of Scotland. Okay, not too far from summer solstice, anyway, at the maximum elongation of Venus. Okay, so he says, give me the wit to describe my dream accurately and make the rhymes good. So that's Geoffrey Chaucer. So he includes Venus in his equation. I'd like to say a few words about Venus in the Mayan world, because there's one of the few documents that have survived from the destruction of the Mayan documents. It's called the Dresden Calendar, the Dresden Codex, and it shows 3 rounds of Venus, each one which lasts 104 hab, and each hab lasts 365 days. So it's the equivalent of 3 times 104 years, or 312 years, okay? It shows 3 rounds of Venus. And it shows the Mayans showed that they had an accuracy for the length of the Venus calendar to 0.08 days in 468 years. So that's very, very precise, linked to observation. The exact synodic cycle of Venus is not 584 days, but 583.92. So it's 0.08 days away from 584. Now, I'm talking about that because Venus has a very special relationship with Earth, because its cycle is 584 days. 584 has a relationship, a whole number relationship with 365. So if we take Venus orbits, when the Earth orbits 8 times, Venus will orbit the Sun 13 times. So when the Earth does 1 orbit, Venus will do 1 whole orbit plus 5/8 of an orbit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So number 2. So the Earth is here and Venus is here. The Earth goes all the way round. Venus goes all the way around plus this and comes to here. And each time it will do a whole orbit plus 5/8, which means that at the end of 8 terrestrial orbits, at the end of 8 terrestrial orbits, it will have gone round the Sun 13 times, with a difference of 1.1 days in 8 years. But if we take the Earth-Venus conjunctions, when Earth and Venus are closest to each other, if we start in this position, position number 1, then we see that 1, 2, 3 in 1 3/5 of a year, the Earth will go round 1 3/5 of a year when it will meet up with Venus again. Okay, so the Earth and Venus will be close. Then the Earth will go round 1 3/5 and come to this point, and then 1 3/5 and come to this point. So in 5 Earth-Venus encounters of 584 days each, it's 8 years of 365 days. That's a total of 2,920 days. So we see that if you keep a calendar of 365 days, then rather than following the Earth's solar orbit, you're following a relationship with Venus. Now, nobody talks about this when ChatGPT says it's not a very convenient calendar, it's not a perfect calendar. It's because for him, or for it, a perfect calendar is following the Earth's solar orbit and linking it to seasons, okay? Whereas apparently for the Mayans and the Egyptians, that wasn't a perfect calendar. The perfect calendar was linking it to Venus and keeping a 365-day year. This is a very, very important thing to understand about ancient civilization, okay? Very important thing to understand. And of course, the relationship between Venus and love brings us back to Saint Valentine, Valentine's Day, and can help us perhaps to get a closer understanding of what's going on. So 5, 8, and 13, these different relationships are numbers in the Fibonacci series. So between Venus and the Earth, there's a Fibonacci relationship. Okay, so let's come back to the calendar. Okay. I'm just looking quickly to see if so I see somebody who's in New Zealand who's listening to this talk. So of course in New Zealand, everything in the southern hemisphere is inversed, all right? All you have to do is put it the other way around, but it's still the same principles, okay? Of course, the history of New Zealand doesn't officially go back as far as the ancient Egyptians, but I dare say a lot was going on there. So let's come back to our subject. And we're going to look now at this question of the death of the king and the construction of minor elements, which took place 2,853 days after the end of the Pronaos, when the temple was globally finished, 2,800, and then the consecration, which took place a very long time afterwards, you see, many years afterwards, 46 years afterwards, 16,660 days, okay? So let's look at the relationship between these two dates. So 16,660 divided by 2,853 gives a ratio of 5.83947. Again, Gyula Priskin doesn't mention this. This is my addition. 5.839, we've just seen the Venus cycle, 583.92. Could it be possible that through this number system, the Egyptians, the Egyptian priests who were behind these dating systems were indicating their knowledge, their precise knowledge of the cycle of Venus? That's a question. And if we look at Denderah Temple now, between the moment the temple was put in service and so the time it was taken between its start, the foundation of the Naos, the time it took to build the temple, 8,980 days, and the construction of the Naos, which was totally finished. So the temple was put into service before the Naos was finished. There's another 3,430 days. If you look at that relationship, you get the golden ratio squared again to really high precision, 2.61807. Gaiola Priskin gives this date, this relationship. So here again in the Denderah dates, the golden ratio is clearly indicated between two dates which follow each other in a number of days. All right. I also point out here that this number of days, 3,430 days, includes the number 343, which is a very important number. I talk about it in the new film I've just made, which will be coming out shortly in English. I'll show you details at the end of the talk. And 343 is 7 cubed. 7 was a very important number. It's the octave, the days of the week. Well, 7 was a very, very important number. Everything was divided into 7 in ancient Egypt. And so the presence of 343, the cube of 7, I don't think is a coincidence. And here it gives us the golden ratio squared. Okay. I'm not hiding that information. Okay, that's good. Right. Another thing we'll look at here is the time between the consecration of Edfu and when the pronaos was finished, 6,570 days. As I pointed out, divided by 365 gives us 18 years, which is 11 1/4 Venus cycles. All right. It's 16 years plus 2 years. So it's 18 1/4 Venus cycles. More numbers. Here again, the last two dates at Edfu, 5,050 days between them. And here Gaiola Priskin suggests a possible first foundation of the Naos of Denderah. This is not indicated on the walls, but because at Edfu there are two dates given for the Naos, which are separated by exactly 25 years. He suggests that there was a possible date before the foundation of the Naos of Denderah, which is J minus 25, which he puts at the 22nd of July, 79 BC, which corresponds, 22nd of July would it be its date today. It corresponds to the beginning of the sign, the beginning of the sign of Leo. And if that were to have existed, there would have been 3,121 days between the consecration. This date, I put it in Denderah, but it fits between these two dates, beyond these two dates, 79 BC, 70 BC, and 57. Okay, so that gives us the number of days between here, and then the number of days between here and here. If we put those two dates, that's, again, sorry, first of all, I was going to talk about the days at the top here. We've talked about them already, 9,125 days. So that's 25 years. If we divide that by 618 divided by 2, it gives us the perfect moon cycle, 29.5307 days, which I talked about earlier, which basically comes down to a lunation period with a precision of 99.9995%. And if we take it the other way around, 365 divided by 29.53059 divided by 20 gives you 0.61800. Okay. So there is an incredible correlation also, not only between the 365-day year and the Venus cycle, but between the 365-day year and the full moon cycle. Okay, linked to the golden ratio. Now, to come back to the lower dates I was talking about, if we take 550 divided by 3,121, we again get the golden ratio 1.61807. Okay, now I repeat, this is between a hypothetical date 25 years before the first date for the foundation of the naos. Now I'm going to, so I've finished now with details from Gyula Priskin. And now what I want to talk to you about is the relationship between the Temple of Denderah and the Temple of Edfu. I showed earlier that they're on the Nile, linked around the Nile here, of course. And these two temples were linked by an annual ceremony called the Feast of the Joyous Union, which was one of the most important festivals at Edfu. What was this about? This is when Hathor, she carried the moon between her horns. She had horns on the top of her head, and she carried the moon between the two heads, whereas the two horns, whereas Horus was the sun. So it's the joint junction of the sun and the moon, has to be understood. So this was the sacred marriage between Horus of Edfu, the Soleil, and Hathor of Denderah, the moon. And so this would take place with the arrival of Hathor, who had been taken out of the naos in the Temple of Denderah, put into a boat, and had come up the Nile. So against the stream, she was going up the Nile 14 days earlier. So this is the period between new moon and full moon, or full moon and new moon. It's half a moon period, okay? So it's a 15-day festival, which begins 14 days earlier. That's a total of 29 days, which is 29 days is a full moon period, okay? So I won't go into all this now. This talk's already rather long, but it's a very interesting thing to go into in detail about when this took place and what exactly it represents. On the 14th day, Hathor left the temple of Edfu in great pomp and traveled back to her own temple in Denderah. Okay, so the link between these two temples is perfectly clear. They were both part of one thing. All right. Now, if we look at the distance between these two temples, as the crow flies, you can do this yourself on Google Earth, we can get the distance of 130,614 meters between the two temples. You can see both temples on Google Earth. You can trace your line, and so you can draw the exact distance. Now, between the two, there is the Temple of Luxor here, which is along the Nile. And if you take the southernmost part of the Temple of Luxor and you draw a line east-west to this line that separates the Temple of Denderah to the Temple of Edfu. So in other words, the Temple of Luxor, on the latitude of the Temple of Luxor, you draw a line which cuts the line between the Temple of Denderah and Edfu into two. The distance from here to Denderah is 49,890 meters, and from here to Edfu, 80,724 meters. And if you divide one by the other, you get 1.61804. This is the first time I have ever publicly spoken about this relationship of the golden ratio in the distance, the placing of the temples of Denderah, Luxor, and Edfu. This is an incredibly precise implantation, a precise layout. And I remind you that these temples were placed on Luxor is a very old temple, but the other temples were rebuilt on the existing places of older temples. And I will come back on this in a further talk, because there's a lot more to be said on this subject. I've already on my YouTube channel, Howard Crowhurst on the YouTube channel, I've already talked about how the pyramids have been implanted using exact measurements. And here the temples in southern Egypt were done in the same way, using the golden ratio. So we have the golden ratio on the physical layout of the two temples with respect to Luxor, and we have the temporal golden ratio in the calendar quite clearly shown with great precision. So it's really beautiful how this was done. And if anybody doubts about the fact that the Egyptians knew about the golden ratio, then maybe you should stop doubting now, because there is clear proof that they did. Now let's come back to I'm going to finish the talk now. Let's come back to the calendar. And I'd like to finish by talking about a date opposite February the 14th. So in the calendar opposite Valentine's Day is the 14th of August, the 15th of August, which is a bank holiday, a national holiday in France, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And so it's 55 days after summer solstice, okay? February the 14th, Valentine's Day, is 55 days after winter solstice, and August 15th, 55 days after summer solstice, okay? It must be said that August the 15th ceremonies or celebrations started on August the 14th in the evening. All the Celtic feast days started the evening before, okay? So the date starts the evening before and carries on to the next day. So this could be said to be the 14th, 15th of August, but the bank holiday is the 15th of August, okay? It's 55 days, so it's the date opposite in the calendar. But because we could also imagine 2 other days linked in the same way, 55 days after spring equinox and after autumn equinox, but there are no particular feast days on those days there. Okay, but we see that between February the 14th and spring equinox there are 34 days, but between August the 15th and autumn equinox, 39 days. It's a lot longer period because summer can go up to 94 days long, all right? So the August the 15th doesn't actually split summer exactly according to the golden ratio, but it happens 55 days after the summer solstice, okay? Now, I'll briefly talk to you about a book which was published in 1893 in Chicago, in North America, by Olney H. Richmond. It's called The Mystic Test Book, or The Magic of the Cards. In this book, Olney Richmond claims that during the American Civil War, he was injured and he was approached by a French soldier who was also injured and who was dying, and who explained to him and gave him lots of references of an ancient knowledge which he said came from Atlantis and which was linked to the pack of 52 cards, which he said had been reintroduced in 15th century France, but which was originally knowledge from Atlantis, okay? And he gives in his book a calendar where each day of the year corresponds to a certain card. Now, I won't go into details on this. A lot of people have already written about these subjects, including myself. But what I'd like to point out is that in his calendar, the 2 dates that I've mentioned, the 14th of February and the 15th of August, are both jacks, or what in French are called valets. That's why it says V for valet, okay? And we could say D is for dame and R for regent. These are jack, queen, and king. These are the French representation, French terms. but V for valet shows that these 2 days have the same type of card. Valet, Jack of clubs, and valet is French for Jack. So Valentine, why is it called Valentine's Day? It could quite clearly come from valet. It could be Valentine's Day, which became Valentine's Day because it's linked to the Jack. Okay. Now, you probably think I've gone a bit mad here, but I'd like to show you some clear evidence that what I'm saying here could quite clearly have existed. Okay, someone's sending me a message. It says you can't see the line. Sorry. Well, anyway, let's keep going. Okay. Now, this is what's called the Hall of Mirrors, or the Galerie des Glaces in French, the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles Chateau. First started by Louis XIII, and then Louis XIV continued it. And this is a long central alley with hundreds of mirrors in it. And right in the center, the central arcade, there is a painting. Can you see on the ceiling? There are these paintings which go from one side to the other. And the central painting is this one. All right. So the top seems upside down because it's curved. It's on the ceiling. So it looks as if it's upside down. And there is a detail in this painting which seems to have escaped everyone's attention until I pointed it out in a book I wrote about this subject. At the bottom of the painting here, you can see two kind of cherubims here who are playing cards. Now, their playing cards are white. There are no inscriptions on their playing cards. But if you look carefully at the bottom of this painting, you will see that there is a little detail here with a playing card in it. And if we zoom in on that, you can see here that this playing card is the Jack of clubs. So, and there's a 6 of hearts also. So 2 cards have been chosen from this pack of cards, the Jack of clubs and the 6 of hearts. These 2 cards in Olney Richmond's calendar correspond to the 15th of August and the 25th of December, okay, which is Christmas Day, or the birth of Christ. Okay. Now, why should the Jack of clubs be of interest at Versailles Chateau? I must point out that, in fact, Louis XIV brought out a special law about the card, the Jack of clubs. He made it legally obligatory for card makers to put a sun on the breastplate of the Jack of clubs when they made their playing cards. He made that by law. That law was in 1701. So from 1701 to 1716, when he died, all the playing cards had Jack of clubs with a sun on their breastplates. Okay, so that's a fact, an absolute fact. Anybody can check up on that. One may wonder why on earth Louis XIV, one of the most powerful kings in Europe at the time, why he was making laws about how the playing cards should be drawn. But he did that. And I discovered some very important facts about Versailles. Versailles, so here we are looking through the central window of the Hall of Mirrors. So the Hall of Mirrors is perpendicular to this view. You are looking down the main perspective of the Chateau of Versailles. This line goes on for several kilometers on a straight line along a valley. You can see here that there are hills on either side. So this line is along a natural valley, and it points exactly to sunset on the 15th of August. which is the date of the Jack of Clubs, which is in that painting exactly in the central axis of this sunset. So this clearly is secret knowledge, which has been shown in a very kind of esoteric way, and has escaped everyone's attention up until now. Okay, now this is going to bring me back to the year of 365 days. I'm going to finish this talk with that. So if we come back to the year of 365 days and we place the 15th of August in the calendar, we discover that between the 1st of January and the 15th of August, 226 days, between the 15th of August and 31st of December, 139 days. If we divide one by the other, we get 1.6259, or 13 over 8. 13 over 8 is 1.625. So the 15th of August divides the calendar year according to the Fibonacci series and the golden ratio. There is no date which better fixes the golden ratio in the year than the date between the evening of the 14th of August and the 15th, okay? So that is a very, very important fact. And it shows then that the date of August the 15th is French national holiday, divides the year, the Saint Valentine or Valentine's Day divides the winter season according to the golden ratio, and the date opposite, the 15th of August, divides the year according to the golden ratio. Okay, so everything I've said about Versailles is in my book called Versailles, The Other Story. Volume 1 is out for the time being. It's called The Secret Science of the Sun. I talked earlier about a new film which will be coming out shortly. I'm not sure how exactly. If you're interested in learning about where this film will be coming out, then subscribe to my YouTube channel or sign in for the newsletter on my website, howardcrowhurst.com. It may come out on YouTube or some other channel. It's 1 hour, 35 minutes long, about the megaliths, called Megalith's Forgotten World. Okay. These are my different books, which are out in English and which are available. The 52 Mysteries book is not at present available. I have to make some changes to that book, and it will be available shortly again. But all the other books are available on Amazon. And here you have the details of my website, my YouTube channel, and Facebook. Okay, so thank you very much for watching.